So we are doing this year, I've covered wills in the past here, and there are so many questions and so many nuances to this that we have decided to break this up into 3 sections. So January, February, and March are going to be all about wills. This month is just going to be kind of an overview of what you need to know about wills, what wills encompass, what's going to happen if you don't have a will. Next month, we're going to be talking about powers of attorney, healthcare power of attorney and the financial power of attorney, the importance of that, what happens if you don't have that in place. Because I think it's one thing to hear you should have one. If you guys are anything like me, somebody says, well, Joni, you really should do this. And I go, why? Because if you don't give me a good enough reason, I'm not going to do it. So we're going to talk about what happens with you and with your life if you don't have those things in place. And in March, we're going to talk about trusts and gifts and all of those kinds of things. There are very few people who don't have something to give away when they pass. So whether it's interest in a house, or whether it's jewelry, or whether it's whatever, if you don't have those things taken care of beforehand, you're not going to care because you're going to be dead. But the last thing you want is for your family to start fighting because you haven't told them what you want and you haven't made your wishes clear, right? We all have kids. Most of us have kids, and I have seen on more than one occasion how if you don't have, even my brother-in-law had a will and there was still problems with that with his kids. So laying the baseline is important. I call this, what do your furry friends inherit? Because I'm a huge animal lover. I have 4 horses and 2 dogs and 4 barn cats and 2 house cats, and it's 13 children. And they are my kids. Now, if I die tomorrow, what is going to happen to them? I need to make sure they're taken care of. So it's not only about my human family, but it's about my entire life and the things that I care about. So I just call this, what do your furry friends inherit, for a little bit of fun. What do you need to know about wills? Who needs a will? Just about everybody. If you're single, you have absolutely nothing, you have no family, you have no children, you probably don't need a will. Most of us have something or someone that we have something that has some value. Most of us have wedding rings of sort, if nothing else, or jewelry that's been passed down through the generations. Or interest in a house, if you have any equity in your house. And if you don't set up a will, and we're going to go into that in a minute, it gets a little bit sticky. A will is needed to make sure that the distribution of your assets ends up where you want them to go. Again, there are very few of us who will say, I don't care where my stuff goes. I mean, there really are. Some of us have kids. More will go to one child than another. There's nothing wrong with that. The whole idea of everybody has to get an equal share is fine and good, but if that isn't the way you feel, then make sure that that's something that you set up. I don't think there's any problem with that. You know, some people have one kid that is super successful and another one that is struggling, and they want more money to go to the struggling one. Or you want money to go to your grandkids, or you want money to go to your favorite charity. Those are all things that a will take care of. The things that need to be included in a will are any of your real property. That is property that you can touch: house, cottages, land, furniture, jewelry, paintings, whatever you have. My mom, and this is from the generation where you got silver for wedding gifts in the box. I mean, those are things that you want to make sure gets handed down wherever you want them to go. My mom gave me that years ago just because she wanted it out of her house because she moved and she had to downsize. But she also wanted to make sure that it went where she wanted it to go. My mother-in-law has done that as well. She has started dividing things up between her kids so that the kids got what she wanted them to come away with when she dies, because she's pretty pragmatic. You know, she's one of these gals that'll say, you know what, I'm gonna die. Aren't we all? I mean, lots of us would like to think that we're gonna live forever, but the chances of that are zero. A true zero. Any investments that you have, savings, CDs, financial assets, 401ks, anything that can pass down to a next generation or to a spouse needs to be taken care of. Now, if you have a spouse that you want to leave everything to, the law literally says that if you die without a will, the spouse and the children will get equal shares. So you would be leaving your spouse without everything. So, I mean, that's one of the problems of not having that all set up, is that you literally can find yourself, I don't get to look at you down there, you literally can find yourself in a position where your spouse is not getting what you need them to have so that they can continue the lifestyle that you guys established together. Any animals, cats, dogs, horses, that would be me. You need to make sure that all of your loved ones are taken care of. And the way this, I don't know, I had thought about it because I am making sure that when something happens to me, if I still have horses, which is the plan, then my horses will be taken care of. There is a plan in place to make sure that they are taken care of with the expectations as best I can of how I want them taken care of. I have a friend who has 2 dogs. Those are her children. Annie and Marnie, she loves them so much. And we happen to be talking about it. She has 3 kids. She is one of those people that will not divide everything equally depending on how her kids are doing. But she has these 2 dogs, and I said, what happens with your dogs if they're alive when you pass away? And she went, I don't want my girls to get them because they're not going to have. She looked at me and she said, would you be willing to take them? I like Annie and Marnie, so I said, yes, because there's no such thing as too many animals, right? Unless you have 117 cats living in your house, and then that might be a little much. Anyway, so that's something that she needed to prepare for and something that came to light. So those are the little things. The reason you can do a will for free, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit and give you some websites, and doing your own will is far better than not having one at all. If you consult with a lawyer, a good one is going to go through a whole lot of questions and really go through what you have and what you care about and where you want your money to go and how you're going to take care of those things. They are schooled, and hopefully they care enough to make sure that they're asking you questions that you hadn't thought of. I mean, that's what they're supposed to be doing. That's why we're paying them, right? So, any wishes you have for the distribution of your property, if you want money to go to your favorite charity or to your alma mater or to the senior center or wherever you want, if you don't have that stipulated, it's not going to happen. And any wishes you have for the care of your property, again, I have a plan in place where my expectations for my animals are this and this and this. So my will states that whoever it is that is the executor or takes care of it needs to abide my wishes to the very best they can. And that comes down to, for my horses, it comes down to care and where they will be and whether or not, because I don't want them split up, so they're not going to be split up. All of those kinds of things. The parts of a will, there are 4 parts, essentially 4 parts to a will. And if you look on one website, 1, 2, 3, 4 is in one order, and you look on another one and they're in a different order, and they're all the same parts. So part 1 deals with how your final bills will be paid, because that will come out from the top of your estate. So the IRS, any government money, and if you haven't trusted or gifted your money, keep in mind that life insurance is tax-free when you give it away. So if you're thinking about leaving some kids money, you can leave them more through life insurance than you can with an actual gift, okay? Because the gifts can be taxable depending on what it is, or if it just, I mean, if you set it up right, the gifts aren't taxable, but if you just say they're gonna get X amount of money, they can be taxed. So you can leave them more with life insurance, just something to think about. But the taxes will get paid first because the government likes their money first. Any of your final expenses, if there are doctor bills or funeral or anything that needs to be taken care of, that'll be done second. And then your family gets, or however it's divided up, gets done last. Part number 2 deals with how the cost of settling your estate and any estate taxes or inheritance taxes will be paid. So that is all set up in your will as well. Part number 3 deals with who's going to be in charge of overseeing the settling of your estate. So that is your executor. You should have a first and you should have a second, just so that if something happens to your first choice, you have a second one in place. My sister is super organized. She's one of these plan A, plan B kind of people. Yeah, she goes to like F, you know. She just does. And life always works according to one of her plans because she's got everything covered. And that's great. She probably has a C and a D for executors. Just saying. That's not a bad deal. Yes?
Okay, just in that order, the executor is my brother for my parents, but he's experiencing some major health problems. And I'm on next, we don't have to do anything on their will then, just leave it be and it'll, okay.
Yep. Yeah. Even if he passes before your parents do, it will just fall automatically to you. But your parents at that point would want to choose another second in line to make sure that that's covered if something happens to you. And it's possible to be physically or mentally or emotionally unable to be an executor. You know, Alzheimer's is the first thing we think of, so you can still be alive and you can still be incompetent to handle that kind of thing. Keep in mind that executors need to be very strong people. It can't be someone who's so busy trying to make everybody happy that it's going to be an absolute mess. It needs to be someone, and we will talk about this more in depth next month when it comes to a healthcare power of attorney, but it needs to be somebody who knows very well how you want your estate distributed. You need to have asked them to be executor first so that they know that, and then you need to talk with them about it so they understand what your wishes are, so that if somebody says, oh no, they really wanted, your executor can stand strong and say, no, that isn't the way that's going to happen. Funerals, death and funerals are absolutely full of love. They should be. I'm a personal believer in celebrating having had someone in my life rather than spending my time grieving that they're gone. Because if I loved them so much I'm grieving, then I really loved having them in my life. It's my own personal thing. Once the funeral is done with, things get a little sticky when it comes to people's stuff. My mother-in-law has next to nothing. She really doesn't. She lives on Social Security. She has her apartment. She has a sofa and a chair and a bed. She really doesn't have anything. 4 of her, yeah, David wouldn't have been, David is dead, but 4 of her children are going to fight over who gets her dishes. They just are. And I can tell you this definitively because her oldest son died a year ago. Oh my goodness. I could not believe how this family imploded once he was gone. I mean, everybody is one thing when he's alive, but so it's, I'm telling you, you don't have to have a whole lot in order to make sure that everything gets distributed the way you want. An executor also will be given what powers they have. If you have minor children, or if you have minor children or disabled children in your care, your will needs to provide for who is going to care for them, or the kids end up going through court system and probate. And the court will decide who should have your children. You talk about another fight, which would be really tough. And I don't know if any of us here are in that position, but if you have kids that have minor children or disabled children, that's something that would be a nice conversation to have with them. Part 4 deals with who will get the balance of your estate, how they'll get it, and when they will get it. You actually have the right in your will to determine when your estate will be given away. Minor children under like 40 who are given a chunk of money from a will normally do what with it? And it's gone. And are they in any better a financial position? And is it how you wanted that money spent? Probably not. I mean, maybe you're just going to give them some money and you're going to say, you know what, they're going to blow it, but they're going to have fun. Who cares? Most of the time we would like it spent a little bit more responsibly. So you literally can decide when. They can get X amount this year and X amount next year, and you can do that. Or they can get gifts. You can set it aside and say, this is for a car. Now you don't get a Maserati, you get a Buick. And you can set that as, you have a lot of power when it comes to that kind of stuff. Now, for those of us that are control freaks, and I'm not necessarily a huge control freak, but when it comes to my estate, I tend to be, you can literally bring it down to the very finest details and make sure that it's distributed as you wish. Okay? So, with all of it, do we have questions? Because this really is meant to be interactive. Hi. There you go. Do we have any questions?
Are you better off to have a family member or an outside person as an executor?
Depends on your family. In my family, it would be an outside person and it would be an attorney. Because it's a lot less difficult to fight and argue and make emotional pleas to someone who has none of their own skin in the game. My brother Scott, who has passed, was the executor for my mom, and he would have done a good job at that. I think my sister Lori is now executor, and she's going to do a good job at that. You have to consider that Mom and Dad started with 6 kids. We now have 3. And I'm not going to fight over my mother's. She doesn't have anything either. I'm not going to fight over her furniture. Lori isn't going to do that, and my brother Lowell isn't going to either. So that's going to work out very well for her. Some families, like my in-laws, having an attorney be the executor would be a whole lot easier and safer, because an attorney's going to say, this is what it is. Suck it up. Where a family member, I mean, they get their emotions all tied up in it. You know how when you get so anxious or so upset or so angry that you can't engage the brain? Have we ever been in that situation? None of you have? Okay, I'll admit it, I have. But it's like you look back on it and you go, and why didn't my brain stop me? Because I was so busy with my heart and what I was feeling that my brain couldn't get engaged no matter how hard I tried. And people with death are very much like that. They're good people, but when the emotions rule, they can, things happen. So that's my advice with the executor. It depends on your family.
I got a question. Let's say, for example, you got an insurance policy or an investment policy.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those are set up with beneficiaries at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So that would go according to what's already established as beneficiaries.
If that's the way you leave it, yes.
I mean, the will can't change it because you can't say one thing in a will and the beneficiaries of that policy say something else.
Actually, you can. Anything you set up as a beneficiary overrules, supersedes a will. So if I have a life insurance policy and I leave it to my horses, and my will says John gets it all, yeah, my horses get it. That always supersedes. But keep in mind that things can change. Life changes. Your will needs to be reviewed at least annually. Any life insurance policies, any investments that you have beneficiaries on need to be reviewed annually because people we love pass away. People we love move away. Their lives change. You know, God forbid somebody and I know there's people out there and they all had parents at one time or another that are absolute heroin addicts. Would you hand over a lump of money to them? Probably not. Can you still give them something and decree how it's going to be given to them? Yes, you can. But if that has happened in the last 9 or 10 or 11 months because they were straight for 20 years and now they are not anymore, that's why the reviews come in handy, because life just changes. Does that answer your question? Did you have a follow-up?
I forgot it.
I am so glad you're like me.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
If you hire an attorney, how can you make sure the attorney doesn't take a lot of your
Thank
estate?
you.
Okay, what was the question?
Because an attorney legal fees can just eat things up.
They can.
What was the
We didn't
question?
hear the question.
If you hire an attorney, how can you make sure the attorney doesn't eat the estate up with legal fees?
I personally, because when it comes to my will, I'm a little controlling. I personally would say, how much will this cost? And that's what I'm going to make you stick to.
Can you put anything down in writing in the will? Or?
I would. You get X amount of money to handle the estate, you know. I also, it would not be beyond me to have a second in line to make sure. Having executors that work together is a real nice way of keeping everybody honest. It's why our government has a checks and balances system, and we know how well that has worked. Works a little bit better when it comes to executors, but that's not a bad idea either, to have two people working together or a member of your family working with an attorney, because it just, my husband always says, it keeps honest people honest. Is the way he always says that.
That was my question, if you're better off, like, I have no children, so am I better off to have one from my husband's side of the family, one from my side of the family to work together as executors so that they keep each other honest?
It's not a bad idea. I mean, the last thing you want, and I know that this happens, the last thing you want is anybody coming in your house and just ransacking it, you know, and things start to disappear. It happened with my husband's grandmother. After she passed away, they went into the house, and all of the things that she had inherited, all of the old, it just disappeared. So nobody has ever really figured out where any of that went, but it helps that. That's going to be another thing in my will, by the way. Is part of the plan is that my house goes in lockdown. The minute I die, it's lockdown, and nobody is allowed in or out until the executor and the attorneys. What?
Nobody's allowed in and out, I like that.
Well, you know, if my husband's still alive, he'll be allowed in. You know, because he lives there. Isn't he lucky I'm nice? But truly, we have a lot of collectibles, and we have a lot of inherited stuff, and there are things that I want to go to specific people. So if someone can just walk in Now I've got, and I don't want any fighting. Here's the way it's going to be. Do you all know that you actually have the right to put in your will, anyone who contests this will is automatically written out of it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm working with my son.
It really cuts the infighting down to a minimum. Anyone, and it's just one sentence long, anyone who contests this will is automatically written out. So, I
Hope
did,
everybody knows about that before they start contesting it or whatever. 'Cause
well,
if they don't, then
your will is going to be read shortly after you die. So, I mean, it's going to be in there. And if somebody contests it, they have to contest it through the court system. And the court system is going to have a copy of your will. And the court system is going to say, and if I have an attorney handling it for me, and the attorney's good, then he's going to go, oh, by the way, you might want to just step back a moment before you even go down that road because you're going to get nothing.
oh, who should have a copy of the will besides, let's say me? Yeah, an attorney.
My attorney, the executor is not a bad idea. One can be kept in your safe deposit box because whoever has the responsibility of going to your safe deposit box then has a copy of it. I have a copy at home. So it always helps to have several copies of it. If I keel over tomorrow, then how many people in my family know who the attorney is that has a copy of my will? Nobody. And my horses can't dial a phone because their feet are too big. I'll work on that. Anyway, so it's always a good idea to have backups with that and have somebody know. And again, my husband knows who the attorney is. So if I die before he does, then we're all good. He'll be taken care of. I did put a link on here for free wills. Again, if you cannot, if you choose not to, if you don't want to, go to an attorney and get it done. This is, Law Depot is a link for a free will. There are several other sites that you can go on to that will do it per Wisconsin state laws as well. So it's, I mean, just type in your Google search or your Bing search, free wills, and you'll get some, but that was one I found. The next thing I did is I gave you some websites. I do a lot of research for these seminars on websites, trying to learn new information, trying to make sure my information is correct. The American Bar Association is the first website I gave you. There is a ton of information there, and it's the American Bar Association. So other than trust my words when it comes to wills.com, I'll take the American Bar Association, I'll take the ABA over that anytime. So the Living Trust Network, there's another American Bar website link that I put on, and wisconsin.gov has a ton of stuff when it comes to wills and power of attorneys and forms that you can use. So if you choose one, if you choose to do it that way, you do not need an attorney to make a will in the state of Wisconsin. You can do your own will. You can handwrite it if you want to on a piece of notebook paper. You need to sign it. You need to have a witness sign it. Okay? That makes it a legally binding document, by the way. If you don't have it notarized, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. If you just sign it and have a witness sign it, then the court is going to have to contact the witness to make sure, because they're going to have to prove the signatures are yours. If you have a notary public, verify the signature. So if you go in front of a notary and you sign it and your witness signs it, then it doesn't go to the court. That is proof that the people who signed it are the ones that actually signed it. There's a website called NOLO, N-O-L-O, and it helps you. There's will-making products They actually help you run down the list of the things, and they will ask you some of the questions that an attorney will ask you. I don't think it's quite as good an attorney, but it's still good information. And the site said, I did not go in there and play. The site said they literally will stop you if it gets to the point where they say you need to talk to an attorney about this and get their advice or get their guidance. So the next part was about the will being notarized, and I talked about that. If you don't have a will, and this is where I scare you to make sure that, how many of us have wills? Most of us, okay. This is where, for those of you that don't, I'm going to try to scare you into going and getting one. There's websites, they're free. Just saying. Your property goes to probate. Probate means, and all states have the process in place, and it's not necessarily the same across all states, but the court then decides who gets your property, and they'll pay all the bills, plus they'll charge a bunch of fees to actually go through the probate, and oftentimes there isn't anywhere near as much left over as there was before you started. It's called, if you die without a will, it's called dying intestate, is the actual, that's the actual legal verbiage of it. It just means that you died without having a will. So when you die intestate, it says that the intestacy laws of the state go into place. Any of your property goes into probate. The first places courts will decide is they will divide your estate between a spouse and children if you have them, okay? If you do not have a spouse or children, they will go to your parents second, and then they will keep going out until they actually find. And there have been stories where, the 8th generation of cousins ends up getting money out of a will because the person died without a will, and they had to go that far in order to find family. So that's what the court will do. If they cannot find family, if you do not have family, then the government gets your estate. And we would all like that, wouldn't we? Because they don't get enough. They just don't have enough. So that's, yeah.
Now, do all states have the same rules? What if you own property in 2 states, for example?
That's a good question. I believe it would be the state that you died in, where you live, not the state you died in, because we can be vacationing. Right. But the state that you resided in when you died, whose court laws will be followed. That is the way it works 95% of the time. So you wouldn't have to worry about having property outside of the state. There was another part to that question.
I guess maybe wherever you're registered to vote, maybe?
Wherever, yeah, because you have to have residency in a state for 6 months in order to register to vote in that state. So it would be wherever your primary residence is, and wherever when I moved over here from Minnesota, I became, through taxes and Social Security and driver's license, I became a resident because my residency, but it was 6 months before they would actually call me official, and wondered whether I would run back home to Minnesota or not. Because the Vikings are there and they're pretty important. That's gonna go over well here. It would have been nice to have the Packers in the Super Bowl. Would have been nicer if the Vikings would have gotten there.
Well, you're looking at a Bear fan.
Well, the Bears, I think the Vikings actually beat the Bears in the standings this year, which was the first in I don't know how many years.
Right in this spot, it doesn't, where you're talking about the lineup, if you don't have a will. It doesn't say grandchildren. It quickly goes to nieces, nephews. Really?
goes to nieces and I'm not, if you don't have a spouse or any children, then it's your parents. And I copied this off a website. If your parents have predeceased you, then your brothers and sisters. If not, and my guess is then it goes to your grandchildren and then it goes to your nieces because your grandchildren are closer family than your nieces and your nephews are.
Your grandchildren, but maybe your children died, yeah. I see.
Yep, yes.
What about if, let's say people travel, let's say you travel to Europe and something happens there and then you kind of die out of the country. So what happens to the procedures about the wills and this and that? The body has to be transported, there has to be some kind of certificates and all that?
Whoops. Yes. I mean, you would have to have a certificate of death. Do you need to bring the body home? No. The body can be buried in Europe. When my brother was murdered in Salt Lake City, we had the choice. He could have gone into the city grave for the John Does. We chose to transport him. We chose to have his body flown home. So that's always a choice you have. But again, it's going to be the laws of where your permanent residency is that in that state that you're going to follow. So they would have to get a certificate home. You need a certificate of death in order to prove to anybody that you're dead when it comes to the law. So even if you die, you know, pushing your, I wrote for one of the classes that I took, I had to write an obituary. I'm 97 years old, I have a massive heart attack and fall face first in a wheelbarrow full of horse poop. That's the way I'm gonna die, I've decided. So, I mean, they can't just bury me under my apple tree. They have to actually, you know, and that's where even if you die on your property, you still have to have an ambulance take you to the hospital so they can declare you dead so somebody can get a certificate that actually a death certificate.
I got a question.
Yes.
I know a lot of people who go to Florida every winter,
Mhm.
and to get by with no property tax, they have to live over 6 months, isn't it, down there?
No, it doesn't, but then,
So
well,
then they
would
would
get-
be a resident
Right,
of Florida, then,
right.
even though they don't really consider themselves down south, do they?
Yeah, they have to.
But they'd have to abide by the Florida rules, right?
Yep, and if your permanent residency is in Florida because you're over 6 months in that
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
then you will go into the Florida testate laws versus the Wisconsin. Anything else?
What is the condition under which you become so-called permanent resident of certain state? Like, let's say that you just spend a winter, you know, somewhere else, right? So, what are the conditions? That you get mail there, that you get what there? How do they know that this is your permanent?
It's living there for longer than
Yeah,
6
more than
months.
6 months.
Yes,
It's
I know what's living there.
having
Getting mail there,
Yeah.
paying rent there? Or-
voting there.
Oh,
Place to voting is the big thing.
So you-
Voting is the
I'm
big
trying
thing,
to
and you
figure
have
out
to
the-
be.
yeah, okay,
you have-
registered to vote.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
In order to register to vote, you have to live in that particular state for 6 months. So if I go down south for the winter, then I would have to be down there 6 months and 1 day in order to register to vote, and that's considered my permanent address.
All right. Still don't understand it because, okay, so I moved to Florida for like 6 months and 1 day, okay, or Arizona, let's say.
Sure.
And how do they know I am there on the first day that I'm in Arizona or Florida?
You're paying taxes, or you're paying rent, or whatever.
Oh, I
something down
see,
there,
some
yeah,
kind of,
something
okay.
on that
Someplace
order.
where you live.
I mean, that proves that you were there.
Okay.
And people who choose to live in a different state for 6 months and 1 day are doing it because they want to be permanent residents of that state.
Okay. That's fair. I understand.
Okay?
But just because you live down there for 6 months and 1 day, doesn't mean that's your permanent residence. I mean, if you don't wanna switch, if you still wanna stay in Wisconsin,
You
but
can
want
still, yeah, you
vacation
don't
down
have to,
there
right. You
for
can-
over 6 months.
I mean, you could stay there 8 months, and, I mean,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as long as you didn't vote
Ex-
there and all
As
that
long
other
as you
stuff.
didn't register to vote or change your driver's license or pay taxes for that particular income taxes or whatever,
Okay.
okay?
All right.
So, you know, we all choose to have our home base somewhere. And it doesn't matter whether you travel 10 months out of the year and go to the same place or 5 different places. you're going to be registered to vote. Your driver's license is going to be in a particular state, and that's what's going to determine it.
All right. Okay. Let's say that you own a property in another state that you're renting out,
Uh-huh.
but with the intention of in furious returning. So can you continue to file taxes in another state even if you live in Wisconsin? Or do you have to switch everything as a residence and register here to vote and all that?
I don't think I understood your question. If I have a house in Arizona and I'm renting it out, but I'm living in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
that's where I'm going to have residency,
In Wisconsin.
in Wisconsin. Because that's where I'm going to be registered to vote, and that's
Okay.
where my driver's license is going to be from. And
Okay.
does that help?
It helps.
Okay. Yes.
You personally will take steps to ensure you know where your residency is for yourself.
Yes.
And there's no questioning about it. I mean, you'll know where you're a resident because obviously you have a license from that state and you're voting in that state, so whether you own property or whatever in any other state, you know where you're a resident, you will know it.
And if you change residencies, it is important that your will gets changed to reflect that.
Okay.
Because if you change residencies, then you're dealing with the testate laws in a different state.
Okay. What if people take a trip around the world and they're going for a whole year? What is their residency then?
Wherever your driver's license is.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
Complicated. Stuff.
It is, kind of, but it's the simplest way to say it is, where am I registered to vote, where's my driver's license? That's where my roots are.
I mean, I got a Florida driver's license and a Wisconsin driver's license, so.
So
Do you really?
Yeah,
Yeah, we did too.
yeah.
No,
So that isn't, you know,
That's not allowed.
necessarily,
But the Florida
It's not
license is
allowed
only
anymore.
good in the
I
state
know
of
it's not
Florida.
allowed anymore, but
Yeah.
it's still good until like 18 or something.
Well, when you get the Wisconsin license, they notify Florida that you're now a Wisconsin resident. So the most current license is 1 year resident.
So you have an alias.
The only reason we had one go down there, if you got a Florida license, it was easier to do everything.
Well, sure it was. Sure it was. Yep.
Got all the state-
And you get all the discounts to Walt Disney World, and I hear it. I hear it. Okay, so you still have residency set up in Wisconsin?
That's where I pay taxes. I mean, if you pay taxes, that's the big thing, right? We're paying our state tax, and down in Florida, you don't have to. That's why
This
people-
is true.
Yeah, that's why people do that. Yeah.
That's why they moved to Florida. So if you have aliases, you're not going to have probably when you die, because they're not going to allow you to be two people anymore. You could have you're a split personality. You both are split personalities. So there's actually 4 of you here. Well, that's fun.
I wonder what other states don't have a state tax besides
There's other
Florida.
states that
I know
don't.
there's,
Mississippi's like that, you pay it on your car.
okay, oh, I see. But you don't, if you don't own a car, then I guess you don't, right? Okay. What about Michigan?
I don't-
Anybody
I don't-
knows in?
All I know is Florida don't have a state.
Well, the best
There's
your
other
best
states
bet is
too.
decide where, because if you want your Wisconsin rules, then you better be sure you're Wisconsin. You know, don't, just decide which one, because if you think you're Wisconsin and then you're in Florida, really, then you better get a different will, huh?
You would need to change it, and if you go to an attorney to do a will, and you say, what are the laws in Florida, they're going to say, contact a Florida attorney, because they're not going to understand them.
You better know yourself,
Okay.
what do you wanna be.
Yep. Okay, so the last part of this, and we've gone through some of it, or what are the steps of probate? Heirs are identified and located. And they have they can do, I don't know how they do it, but they get her done. The deceased property and assets are gathered and accounted for. Deceased debts and creditors are paid. Income tax and estate tax returns are filed and the tax is paid. The assets and property are sold to create cash that pays the bills, taxes, expenses, and then payment and distribution is made according to the way it's set up. So,
Am I correct in thinking from what you've been saying, there aren't any laws about how much you have to give to different family members. In other words, that you have to give 50% to your husband, 25% to each kid, or that there isn't anything like that. You just give your money to anybody you want to give it to. Is that?
That is absolutely, there is someone who will be in my will who actually owes me money. Let me guess. They have to pay me back before they're going to get anything out of the will. I can do it. I can do. I have a very, very good friend whose mom and dad had a fairly large estate. And when her daughter was having tough times, her mom would give her money and made note of it, so that that portion of the estate was considered already given to her. So that came right off the top.
Okay, I have another question. Okay, if there's both names on the title of the house, okay, husband and wife, and then let's say something comes up with one of them, let's say, well, I would say, so the other person that is on the title inherits the property, because you mentioned that it's divided among four. The other spouse that's alive plus the children, if there's any.
If you don't have a will now, when it comes to titles on property, it's a little bit different, and it depends on how you title the property. If you title the property correctly, which is what is done 95% of the time, then the other person on the title now owns it. If it's not titled properly, the other person on title will own half of the house, and the rest of it will get divided between the other heirs.
What is proper? It's an and or?
I do know, not off the top of my head, I can't tell you. But when you title a house, and any title company can tell you, when you title a house, they will usually explain to you, because there are 4 different options for how you want to title your property. So one of them is, I can't remember the verbiage, but what it does is it says that the property automatically goes to the other person on title.
And that can be changed at any time with a quick tenancy.
Yes, joint tenancy. There you go. Thank you. My hero for the day. Joint tenancy. And yes, you can change it with a, you can change it with a quitclaim deed. Yes. Yep. Yep, and that will supersede will, by the way.
Okay, so, my sister and her husband just retired. Well, we're changing our wills, because pretty much of the time we'll be together, in that aspect, if they were both killed in an accident or something, and their house is that way, joint tenancy, then what happens? Then it just...
If they don't have a will, it'll go to probate. The house will be sold and be divided among the heirs.
Okay. But if they have the will, but it's like, okay, this goes to my husband or my spouse, whatever, then, and they're both gone, what happens in that instance?
In my will, the way it's divided up, anyone who is already deceased, then the proceeds of the estate are divided amongst the remaining beneficiaries.
Okay, so somebody would have to sell that that property would be sold, that house.
If there isn't a secondary, or they both die, and that's automatically set up in wills, by the way, or should be, is that my husband and I, if we die together, then if we die separately, the spouse gets everything. If we die together, everything is divided amongst. Okay? So if John dies before me, I get everything. If I am already dead, then everything is divided between his children and his grandchildren. Did you have a question? No? Okay. I saw your arm go up in the air. Any other questions?
What does it cost to get a will made out by an attorney?
Depends on the attorney. It can cost a couple of $100. Depends on how how complicated it's going to be.
What kind of an attorney do you go to? Any of them, or is there regular ones that just do that kind of stuff?
There are attorneys that only do estate planning, and you're far better off. Laws are so detailed that attorneys will either go into defense, or they'll go into business law, or they'll go into estate law, and you want to choose an estate law because that's their job, is to keep up on anything that changes.
Mm-hmm.
Next question? I'm not done talking yet. Got to be more questions.
Would you talk a little more on the probate? And the reason I say that is I was just recently in a situation where the will was made out, and my mother passed away about 8 years ago, and then my dad passed away a year ago. There was probate on part of investments. Now, the reason there was probate was because the company that had been dealt with didn't change things properly after my mother died, let's put it that way. And I also had an aunt with the same name as my mother with a different middle initial. They had my mother's gift certificate, or death certificate, but for some reason, she was still on there as beneficiary, which is how it was set up originally. Okay, so they never changed things over. So we ended up as a family having to deal with probate, but it was just on a small portion because everything else was set up as it should have been and handled as it should have been. Is there any recourse on that? I mean, it was just kind of a whole weird situation.
It's if part of an estate can end up in probate if the estate is not divided and taken care of as it should be. Okay? So again, reviewing your will, reviewing the beneficiaries, making sure you have secondaries in place, making sure that everything is done correctly is one of the key reasons to go to an attorney. Had your dad had everything reviewed by an attorney that would have caught that, then that would have all been straightened out, and the entire estate, that portion of the estate would not have had to go through probate. And you can avoid probate. That's not difficult to do, but everything needs to be done correctly. It doesn't take much for the court system to have to step in and decide what's going on with
Probate
something.
does get messy, large family, and we knew the wishes of my parents, so we went along with their wishes, even though it wasn't set up that way. As children, we could have inherited a little more, but that wasn't their wish, and we all knew that, so we distributed as we had.
And isn't that cool that your family did that? That's a rarity. Just saying. I mean, that's really neat that you abided your parents' wishes instead of doing whatever you could.
My siblings all knew what the wishes were,
That's cool.
even though it wasn't fair, we all know. And going through probate, we were told, no, this is, you don't have to do this, you can do this. And we're like, no, this is the way, this is what they wanted, so.
That's cool. So yeah, it's to make sure that everything is taken care of. Say you own a bunch of stock in a company and the company is bought out. It's a really good time to make sure that everything is taken care of the way you need it. That can affect your will. I mean, anything that changes in your life can affect your will. So it's not as if you can write one when you're 25 and you have some young kids and that's going to be good for your life, because that isn't necessarily the way that's going to work. Because what if you inherit some property and you don't have that? I mean, that can get messy, and it can end up, if things are not done correctly.
Okay. Thinking of things messy, what happens, my mother's experiencing some dementia, and if my father would pass first, she's not, I mean, she doesn't do checkbooks or anything right now. We've taken that, away from her. But should there be a person in place then that would oversee what she does?
Somebody needs to be put in place to take care of your dad's estate and to take care of. let's say your dad wants your mom to have everything for her care. Someone needs, because she's not cognitive, she's not able to do it, then someone needs to be put in place to do it if that's something your dad is doing right now. So does that need to be set up in a will? Pretty much, because if it isn't, then probate will set up someone, okay? The court system will set someone up who will charge the estate for the time spent. If my husband ends up seriously disabled and cannot take care of it, he doesn't do the checkbook now.
My dad doesn't either, and so one of the family members does it. So that's what I'm saying, should that be like a legal, something put in the will or set up?
You need a financial,
Huh?
doesn't she need a
Financial power of attorney?
Right, okay.
And that often is part of the will, and that is going to be its own separate thing next month, because I want that covered in depth, because we need to understand what healthcare power of attorneys are. They need to understand what their duties are on our behalf. So let's say that I end up at a nursing home, okay? John predeceases me. He has 2 children. Can we see where this is going? So that needs to be set up in advance, so it is taken care of the way your dad wants your mom taken care of. And if that means the trust goes to her care, then that's exactly how that should happen.
Yeah, there are other things, and I just am not sure who's in charge, they
And that's
understand that. Or,
that's a really good question for your dad. It's a really good conversation with your dad is, you know what, Dad, I really want you to live forever. Chances are really good you're not. And he's going to, you get to be, I don't know, my mother-in-law says, my body's wearing out. My mind is good, but the body's wearing out. You need to make sure that he is talking to the people that he needs to step up and do what they need to do. Because if he names someone, let's say he named your oldest brother, Bert, to take care of your mom, and Bert doesn't know it, and suddenly your dad dies, and it's stated that Bert's going to do it, and he goes, yeah, not only do I live in California, and I'm not anywhere near there, but I have no desire to do that. That was unfair. I mean, it's unfair of us to put weight on somebody without talking to them and making sure they're okay with it.
Don't you have to have a certain amount of value to go to probate? If it's under a certain amount, you don't have to go to court?
I think so. Do I know exactly what that number is? No. My mother-in-law's estate would not go to probate. She simply doesn't. My mom's estate would not go to probate. There isn't enough there. She has a life insurance policy, but beneficiaries, life insurance policies overrule everything, including the court. So that doesn't make any difference. So, the court's not going to spend a bunch of money on an estate that's worth $700 because they're not going to make any money on it. It'll cost the court system more to sell off everything and divide up the money than it'll actually,
Excuse me, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's around 30,000, I believe.
The DMV forms are now 50,000.
$50,000. There you go. 50,000. Yep. Yep. So say you're worth less than 50,000, and I'm going to be devil's advocate here for a little bit. You're worth less than 50,000 and you pass away and you have 3 kids who are alive and well and likely to argue. Then what's going to happen? You're not in probate, so then your kids are just fighting about it. And as much as I hate to say the chances of your kids fighting over your will are high, It's simply, death does, when my brother-in-law died last February, when they found out he was dying, the entire family imploded. And I mean, they imploded. The will said that his wife got everything. His mother was part of hiring an attorney to find out where his ashes was, because nobody thought that his wife, I'm telling ya, now if I would have asked all of these people a year before he died, if they would, oh no, death does something to people. And I had a teacher who has been healthcare power of attorney and executor, very strong man. And I wouldn't fight with him, I don't think. That's why people come to him to do that. And he said, Joni, this is normal. He said, I said, really? Really? And he said, this is normal. Death does something to families. It just does. So, for what it's worth.
Sandra was, what do they call it? The one that had to dish out
Executor?
Had to dish out all the money to people. Couple times, but anyway, and one, she had her aunt left money to a whole bunch of different people. One was in a nursing home. The person in the nursing home was under state thing. They had to go off of that until they used up that money, and they didn't even want the money, but they had to take it, you know. And stuff.
Had to take it.
You know, it was really a mess, you know. Couldn't find some of the people.
And again, reviewing your will annually will most times, because the gal who was in the nursing home had probably been in there prior. So, I mean, that's something that if you review your will, you go, oh yeah, this might cause a huge amount of trouble. You know?
Right.
Yep.
Is it normal to have to do all the running and finding the people when you're the executor? The lawyer did nothing. He didn't even show up in court. It was your, we thought, why are we paying him anything?
I don't care what job, career you're in, there are people who are not worth their pay. Simply are. You know, it's not just used car salesmen, it just isn't. And it's not just attorneys either, but that's all part and parcel of trying to make sure that you have as a good an attorney. Now, what if my attorney goes out of business or he dies before? I mean, seconds are always, they're always nice to have. Having an attorney, mine literally has called me and said, you know, I was reviewing your will. There's a good attorney. There's somebody I want to keep. You know, but if something happens to him before I die, because he's not all that much younger than I am, and I'm going to be 97, you know, then, you know, I want to make sure that there's a second in line.
So you have to say that in your will, huh? Like, so P.S.
You need, if
the
you...
one that wrote our will, I don't even want to deal with him ever again, and I want to, like you say, have a second. It doesn't have to be that person, right?
No, but I'd make sure that your will states that.
So we better state that.
You can amend, you can amend without going to all of the expense of rewriting a will. You can add a codicil to a will that will amend the will for you.
Because I don't want to go to him for anything. Others can
Find
do what
it.
they want, but if I'm the one left, I don't want to deal with the person that we chose.
You know, and as far as you having to try to find everybody, if I'm going to leave someone part of my estate, it would be nice if I provided where they were. And in most cases, you know. But if you're talking about extended family, the days of all of the extended family living very near each other are gone. And the days of not knowing how. If I was the executor of my mother-in-law's estate and I needed to give money to her nieces and nephews or grandchildren, I'd be lost. So it would be nice if all of that information, as updated as you can possibly make it, is in a will. The better we do, the more careful we are, the more detail-oriented we are, the easier it is on your executor. And the last thing we want to do to someone who is already sad because we have passed is to put them through hell trying to figure out how to make our wishes, how to make them happen. I mean, that really isn't what we want to do, is it? I mean, if you don't like your executor, you know, but then you probably shouldn't have him on there.
So the best thing to do is die broke, right?
Die broke.
Way before, yeah.
Give it a. So the day before my obituary says I'm going to die, I need to give it all away. All the furniture, all the dishes, I'm going to get rid of it all. So that then all they have to worry about is a wheelbarrow full of poop. Yes, that's a great idea. And we would all do that, wouldn't we? If we knew when we were going to die. We don't.
Anything new about split families? Like you say, not only you live somewhere else, sometime you get married 2 or 3 times, and there's some other children every, couple here, couple there, different ones. Okay, now you have extended families. They say in school, more than half of the children are an extended family.
Yep. Make sure your will is. Make sure your will is. My friend Greta, who inherited her and her brother inherited the estate because her dad predeceased her mom. She did not. It wasn't that she didn't like her son-in-law. It was that she was wiser than her daughter. Her daughter was left the money. It wasn't left to Greta and Huey, it was left to Greta. And she did that very intentionally. But then, had Greta deposited that money into their joint account, it's now half Huey's anyway.
Yeah.
So, so it never hurts. There is a guy that I know, doesn't live too far from me, that literally has left his estate. He's got a sizable estate, and it will go to his 3 daughters, but it will not go to the daughters' husbands unless they stay married for X amount of time or whatever he has decided. He's a control freak. And that's okay. I really like the guy. But he has made sure that his wishes are going to be followed. So there's nothing wrong with doing that in a will and saying, I'm going to make sure, especially with extended families. Because let's say you've got stepkids, and your stepkids don't necessarily like you. But their dad, my husband, dies before I do. If we don't have that all taken care of, I'm going to have a mess on my hand anyway. If we don't have that taken care of so that it's legal, I'll lose half my house. Yeah, bad thing. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
If you have your will made with an attorney, can you personally do an amendment, or does it have to go back to an attorney?
Does not have to go back to an attorney. You would have to follow the how do I. You can amend it. You can amend it on a piece of notebook paper. Make sure your signature is, make sure it's witnessed, and it would be far better if you went to a notary to do it. Yep. And notaries are easy to find.
Well, can notary probably be also a witness, or it has to be separate?
It has to be separate. And best if they don't know who you are. You know, say I was a notary and I notarized my husband's signature.
That's not legal.
It isn't legal, but let's say I do it anyway, because I'm a notary. Yeah, that's not gonna, I mean, you know, I'm just opening up a can of worms that isn't worth it. So when it comes to notaries, strangers are great. Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna say that every once in a while you hear of somebody who says, well, they went to the doctor and they had a bad diagnosis, and they said, well, get your all of your
Get your affairs?
Yeah, get your affairs in order. Is that, what do they mean by that? Do that mean to try to get your belongings into more of a liquid kind of form, your assets, you know, like as far as if you have stock holdings and things like that. So it's easier for people to actually divide things up and, or just to look and see how things are designated as far as your belongings.
All of the above. You need to make sure that your will is in order. You need to make sure your health care and financial powers of attorney are in order. Because if you're diagnosed like that, I mean, my brother was perfectly capable of writing out all the checks until he was 2 weeks before he died. And he wasn't any longer competent. He was way too sick. So you need to make sure that all of that is in order. My brother-in-law was the same way. When you die of cancer, there's that last week where you can't, you know, don't wait. So the doctor is saying make sure that your will is up to date. Make sure that anything that you want to have given away is given away. I have certain things I would like to go to certain people. So I would make sure if somebody said that, the first thing I would do if I went to a doctor and the doctor said you've probably got 6 months, sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. You probably got 6 months, Joni. The first thing I would do is contact my attorney and make sure that my will is absolutely, even if I had reviewed it 2 weeks before, I would make sure it was exactly what it wanted to be. Then I would go through all of my belongings and I would make sure that anything that I wanted given away as is was given away. Because I can gift that kind of stuff. You're going to end up in a lot of trouble if you're a millionaire and you try to gift $1 million. Yeah, it's kind of sticky. But when it comes to jewelry or when it comes to my collectibles, gifting those things before I die just to make sure that they don't have to get sold. It's okay to make sure that it doesn't have to get sold, to get liquidated when I didn't want, when I wanted that piece of jewelry to go to somebody. That's important to me. And it's also a good time to sit down and have a talk with everybody and say, here's the deal. Here's the truth of it. Here's the way things are going. Here's the way. And oh, by the way, everybody, I love you very much. And there's a sentence in my will that says, if you contest it, you're out. Just say it.
Even if they're not listed, if you contested, you weren't going to get it anyway. I mean, if you weren't listed, you know, because you don't have to list everybody.
No, I mean, I can contest anybody's will I want to. I'd be barking up a tree, you know, I should contest Robin Williams. You know, he's worth probably more than, but it's, yeah, it's going to be a waste of my money and a waste of my time.
Wouldn't it be better if you have assets, say your bank account and your savings account and your stocks, to have payment on death or transfer on death on those prior to any will that you have?
If you're the
In case you're killed in a car accident, it's automatically given to whoever you've designated.
My husband has a checking account, only his name is on it. The bank told us to do a POD. I also asked them to make sure because I'm not going to have that frozen. So I am POD on my husband's account. He is POD on my personal account. We have not done a POD on our joint account. That could go to the estate. But I need to make sure, because you also don't want someone you love very much, like a spouse or a child. When my brother Scott died, Scott and Carolyn were on the account together, okay? So now we're spending, and I was in Indianapolis when he died. I went back to South Bend with my sister-in-law to help her through that week of planning a funeral and doing all of that kind of stuff. And the bank froze their account literally because Scott's name was still on it, which I think was really I think that was just really screwy. Well, she wasn't going to get his life insurance for several weeks. Well, they won't take care of a body without getting paid. The funeral home just says, you know what, if you don't pay me now, the chances are. So she had to borrow money from the bank. And because they didn't have enough in the account to pay for it, and Scott made the vast majority of the income, they didn't want to give her a loan.
You mean her name wasn't on it, so she couldn't?
Her name was on she was a beneficiary for the life insurance. But they wanted to make sure that that loan for the funeral fit into the debt ratio. She had just lost her husband. The bank was, I'm sitting there, she's arguing, you don't understand. I think she had to give them a lien on the life insurance policy in order to get the loan. So, if I had advice for anybody, either pay for your funeral in advance and decide what you want, or have enough money set aside to pay for a funeral so that whoever's going to pay for it can just get to the account and pay for it. Because the last thing my sister-in-law needed was to fight with the bank over the money to pay the funeral home so she could bury her husband. Really, that was the last thing she needed to do that week.
You always say you should have a safety deposit box in a different bank that you don't deal with or out of town and that don't.
Then you have a chance to
Then you have a
get
chance
in.
to get at it before
They don't read the paper.
They don't lock it up right away.
Yeah.
That's true.
But if you're on a safety deposit box, you need a secondary or nobody's going to get into it.
But I went down to one time to get in my safety deposit box in Oshkosh, and they wouldn't let me in it. They said, you just had a death in the family. They says, who, my wife? Yeah. I says,
They had it marked and everything?
They had it marked, with a little red tag or some darn thing on it. And I says, well, geez, I just left her about 5 minutes ago.
She was
She
still
was
walking
I said she was still walking, and they wouldn't let me in it. I had to come back the next day, they straightened it out, they put it on the wrong box.
Oh.
Humans make errors.
Well,
we
yeah,
just
I know, but I
we
mean,
just
that's how
all do.
quick
But
it happens,
that's
though.
yep. So that whole box buried in the backyard kind of deal, not a bad idea. But if you tell somebody it's there and they're broke,
Yeah.
you don't have any insurance on that money either.
Put it in glass, because
Go
metal
out.
detectors will get it otherwise,
Well, hey.
Without a metal cover on it.
If you pay for your funeral in advance, not only are you guaranteed today's prices, my mom did, by the way, as did her husband. So when her husband died, the funeral was all done and said. It was all taken care of. She didn't have to make those arrangements. All she needed to do was contact people. Huge weight off her shoulders. My mom has done the same thing. All the arrangements have been made and the funeral's been taken care of. Nobody has to deal with any of that kind of stuff, which is great because then my sister isn't trying to scramble to try to do something on, because believe it.
Set up one of those prepaid funerals, my mother did that too. Is it possible to set it up so either it's paid for either one, whoever dies first?
I would imagine. Haven't done that, haven't
That'd be
researched
a
it.
great idea.
Yeah. My mom and Al just did them both at once. They just said, hey, we're both going to die, let's just get her done. He had sold some property that he had, so they had some extra money, and she was able to do that. The fear is what happens if that funeral home goes out of business. And I don't know how that then is taken, I don't know how that is taken care of.
Go bankrupt or something, right?
It's supposed to be very safely done, Could I set up an account with my attorney where he puts it away to pay for my funeral? Yeah. Keep in mind, I'm going to be buried under my apple tree. It's going to be really cheap. But could I do that? Yes, I could.
When you talked about the TOD, so you have $1 million in your one stock and it has a TOD.
POD.
I mean, yeah.
Payment and debt.
Yeah, well, I have one that's transfer.
Oh, okay.
Do you have an amount that goes into probate then, because it is $1 million or something? No, you don't, that doesn't push it all into probate just because of the amount, does it?
I don't think that payable on death is necessarily, I don't know 100% for sure. I love this because you guys always catch me on something.
That's something I'm interested in, like if it's over that, do they say, okay, then, even though you have a will, now we still have to go to probate because it was that $1 million whatever in your.
If you have a will where that is given to someone, I don't think payable. I'm not sure payable on death supersedes a will. Does it?
You say it does, but I
There
mean,
you go.
is that amount of money all going into probate even though you have a will because you're over that amount?
No,
No.
not if the will is set up correctly. And if you have a payable on death and that goes automatically and is considered beneficiary, then thank you.
You're still
Or
not.
transfer on to if you have stock.
Yeah, they use both words. I was just wondering if they have to,
It doesn't have to, estates don't have to go to probate.
just so
It
everything
add-
is labeled.
Everything has to be set up exactly the way it needs to be done. And it needs to be done legally, and it needs,
Set up a trust.
You can do trusts, and that is part of March. We're going to be talking about, if you have $1 million, how do I make sure that it goes somewhere? So we're going to talk about revocable trusts. We're going to talk about irrevocable trusts because there's a ton of misinformation about that. We're going to talk about gifts. We're going to talk about all of that. Minors, we're going to talk about all of that in March.
Ma'am, do you have to have payment on death on things besides listing them as beneficiaries? Or does that mean the same thing?
She just informed us.
I'm pretty sure that if you have assets and you have stock or you have assets in the bank or whatever, if you put on there payment on death or transfer on death, which is if you have stock and you want to have that, you can divide that up. Say I have 2 children. It's divided evenly between the 2 children on transfer of death or payment on death. in my
Company follows
understanding.
that more than they don't care what your
And
will
it-
says.
And it's my understanding, if you do that, it does not go anywhere but to them. It
Mhm.
doesn't go through probate, it doesn't.
So, but I mean, if you have beneficiaries listed on that already,
They don't even care.
they don't
You
care,
have
you still
John
gotta
or
have the
Mary
words.
You have to have.
On your stock or on your
transfer for
TOD.
payment.
They go by
Okay.
that, they don't even care what your will says.
Yeah, I don't mean the will, but I mean, like, say on the stock, you got beneficiaries.
They get it
Well-
from the company then.
Then
That would be the same
The,
thing.
the beneficiaries would be who the stock would be transferred to.
Okay.
Yes. And keep in mind, and what I'm hearing here is that having payable or transfer on death is the same as having a beneficiary. Because if you have a beneficiary set up, that supersedes anything your will says, automatically.
Which prevents it from going through probate.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
and your insurance too, and you have to remember, like, if your brother or your parents died, you should change that insurance or something that you have, because that company follows that, they don't even look at what your will says anymore, they look at what you have.
And life insurance is important to make sure that the beneficiaries or your executor knows where your life insurance policies are and knows where a copy of it is. And we do that in a whole different, where are your important documents. But also to make sure that the life insurance company knows who the beneficiaries are and can contact them. You guys, there are millions and millions and millions of dollars a year in life insurance policies that are never cashed in because the life insurance company is not notified of the death because nobody knows that they had it.
Yeah, you forget to tell your kids that you took one out maybe
Well-
20 years ago with Globe or
Mhm.
whatever.
Yep, and it's really tough. That's not an easy conversation to sit down with kids that you really want. You want to grow old and you want to see great grandchildren. You want to do all of this, and they love you very much and you get along very well. It's really hard to sit down and say the cold hard facts are I'm going to die. No, you're not, Mom. You're going to have lots of time. How many times have I heard this? You know, when I was in life insurance, we'd talk about somebody having life insurance to protect their family. I'm not going to die. Okie doke. I'll take, well, I'm not going to die for a long, long time. I know lots of people that would have said that didn't make it. out of their 20s or 30s, or you know what I mean? So is it a tough conversation to have? Yes. Is it an important conversation to have? Yes. If your executor is someone in your family that understands, it's helpful if the entire family understands. Family meetings are not a bad thing to have, and to say, you know what, I really would like to live for another 45 years. But the fact is that the one thing that I can't tell you is when I'm going to die. I just know I'm going to. And I want you guys to know this, because I don't want any fighting after I'm dead. Because there's a sentence in my will that says if you're going to fight, you're not going to get anything.
And with the second marriages, one lady found out that her husband just forgot because he had been retired and he never put her down. That's what you mean about the review every year.
Had John not changed his will after John and I got married, his ex-wife would have gotten half of everything had he died. I said, yeah, we'll be changing that. And we had it changed within, I think, 3 or 4 days of being married. And I was like, okay, you cannot die in the next 3 days. You just can't. Because, yeah, his ex-wife would have got, that was what the will said. Now, because it was a second marriage and I was married, it would have made a difference. But she still would have gotten half of everything. Anything else? We will, next month, we got like 18 people here. So is everybody going to be here next month? Third Wednesday, 9 a.m. I will, what?
I said you might be dead.
If you're not dead, I would prefer dead bodies not be here, just a little creepy. I will come with 20 copies. We are going to talk about we're going to talk about healthcare power of attorneys, and we're going to talk about financial power of attorneys, and it is going to be another plan on an hour and a half or so. It's because it's pretty, this is why we divided this up, okay? And it's very important. So, have a wonderful day.